welcome to the deep dive. Wow, you guys sent in a ton of stuff about mobile device security.
Yeah, it's a pretty big topic.
It is, and honestly, I'm kind of nervous to see what we uncover here.
Me too, a little bit.
But that's what we're here for, right?
Yeah,
To dive into those hidden dangers lurking in our pockets.
exactly. See if rooting is really as cool as it sounds.
Yeah, and explore that whole BYOD thing, where personal freedom kind of clashes with, corporate control.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. It's kind of fascinating how we trust these little devices with our entire digital lives,
Right.
but we rarely stop to think about, how much data they actually hold.
That's true. We use them for everything. Banking, shopping, gossiping, even storing sensitive work files. But what exactly are the security risks that are unique to mobile devices? I mean, beyond just, losing the thing.
Well, one thing is that attackers can actually design these malicious websites that can figure out what kind of device you're using. No, yeah, and then exploit weaknesses that are specific to that model.
So it's not just about avoiding, shady websites in general.
Right.
It's about the fact that those websites can actually kind of see what phone I'm using.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's a bit unnerving. What about the apps themselves? I mean, do they pose a risk too?
Definitely. A lot of apps, especially free ones, they might not have the same level of security as a web browser.
Oh, okay.
And some might, function as advertised, but in the background, they're quietly sending your personal data to some remote server. Maybe it's for advertising, but that data could easily end up in the wrong hands.
Makes you think twice about that free flashlight app.
Exactly.
One thing that surprised me in these articles was how phishing attacks are even more effective on mobile. Why is that?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. Mobile users are often distracted.
Yeah.
Maybe they're on the go or multitasking.
Right.
And we also tend to overshare on social media from our phones, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which gives attackers more material to craft those really convincing phishing messages.
So it's like a perfect storm of distractions and oversharing, which kind of makes us sitting ducks.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then, of course, there's the classic, lost or stolen device. Oh, yeah. What kind of damage can that do?
A lost phone is basically a gold mine for a thief, because it's not just your personal information they could access, but if you use that device for work, it could expose sensitive company data too.
Okay, so it's officially feeling like I'm carrying a ticking time bomb in my pocket.
Well, maybe not a time bomb, but...
Okay, but hopefully not a time bomb. Yeah. But thankfully, these articles also mention some safeguards that are, built in for devices, right?
Yeah, for sure. Access control is a big one. Okay. So things like passwords, biometrics, and two-factor authentication. These all act as layers of protection, even if someone does get a hold of your phone.
So even with a stolen phone, they can't get in without the right credentials. Right.
At least not easily.
But what if they, bypass the OS lock screen somehow? Are we just out of luck then?
Well, that's where digital signing comes in. It verifies that apps are from legitimate sources, and haven't been tampered with. Think of it like a seal of approval. It helps ensure you're not installing something malicious.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
The articles also mentioned encryption. I get the concept, but how does it actually work on a mobile device?
So encryption basically scrambles your data, making it unreadable without the decryption key.
Okay.
This protects things like your text messages, emails, and also the data stored on the device itself. It's like having a secret code that only you know.
So even if someone gets past the lock screen and they can see my files, it's just gibberish to them.
Yep, exactly.
That's pretty cool. What are some other ways that devices are, designed to protect us?
Well, another layer is something called isolation or sandboxing.
Okay.
Basically, this means apps are separated from each other, and they can't access each other's resources without permission. So this would prevent, say, a rogue app from snooping on your banking app.
Oh, okay. That's clever. And I know Android has this feature where apps have to, ask permission to access things like my camera or location. That seems like a good thing, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's permission-based access control. It gives you control over what information each app can access. And it's one area where Android does give you a bit more granular control than iOS.
Interesting. Speaking of things that can make you nervous, the articles went into the OWASP top 10 mobile risks. How do those actually apply to everyday users like me?
Well, the first one is called improper platform usage, and it basically highlights how important it is to understand your device's security setting.
Okay.
Because, not setting a screen lock password or using a weak one, it's like leaving your front door wide open.
Okay, point taken. I would admit I've been guilty of that in the past. What about these risks related to, like, data storage? What should we be doing differently there?
Well, insecure data storage emphasizes the need to be careful about where your data is actually stored. So, think twice before saving sensitive information in apps, especially those free ones. Do you really need that game app to store your credit card details?
Probably not. And then there's the whole issue of using public Wi-Fi. Is that as risky as everyone said it is?
Insecure communication, the next risk on the list, points to that danger.
Okay.
It's just really easy for hackers to intercept your data on these networks, especially if you're doing things like online banking.
So no more checking my bank balance while sipping lattes at the coffee shop.
Probably a good idea.
Okay. What about passwords? What's the best practice there?
Well, insecure authentication reminds us that strong, unique passwords are super important.
Right.
Enable multi-factor authentication wherever you can. It just adds that extra layer of security to your accounts.
Right. It's funny how we'll spend hours choosing the perfect filter for an Instagram photo, but then use the same password for everything. Bad habits.
It's true.
So those are the first three. To what comes next?
Okay, so insufficient cryptography is all about the quality of the encryption being used. You want to make sure your data is protected by strong encryption methods, especially for that sensitive information.
Makes sense. What about controlling who actually has access to my data? I'm thinking about all those times I've just clicked allow without even thinking.
Yeah, well, that's where insecure authorization comes in.
Okay.
You should really be in control of who or what has access to your information, whether it's apps, websites, or even other people.
Okay, so be mindful of those permissions. And what of the apps themselves? How do we know if they're safe, even if they are from a legitimate source?
Well, the next three risks kind of focus on that.
Okay.
Client code quality, code tampering, and reverse engineering. They all focus on the code behind the apps. They highlight how important it is for developers to write secure code and for users to stick to trusted sources.
So always download apps from the official app stores.
Yeah, that's the safest bet.
That seems like a no-brainer, but I bet a lot of people don't do that.
You'd be surprised.
Okay, and then the last one.
The last one is extraneous functionality, and it refers to those features in an app that aren't really essential.
Okay.
And they could potentially introduce security risks. Think of bloatware,
Yeah.
It's not always malicious, but it can increase what we call your attack surface.
So it's not just about the apps themselves, it's about all the extra bells and whistles that come with them.
Exactly.
That's something I never really thought about. So, big picture, it seems like we need to be constantly on guard, huh?
Well, in a way, yeah, but knowledge is power, right? The more we understand these risks, the better we can protect ourselves.
Right, but awareness alone isn't enough. Now we need to be proactive about our security habits too.
Definitely.
Now, one of the sources really dove into spyware, which honestly freaked me out a bit. Just the idea that an app could be, like, secretly monitoring your every move.
Yeah, it is a little creepy, and these spyware apps can be incredibly invasive. They can track your location, record your calls, even log your keystrokes. It's essentially like having a digital stalker in your pocket.
I know there are, like, legitimate uses for this kind of monitoring software,
Right.
but it just feels like there's huge potential for misuse too.
Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of ethical and legal concerns surrounding spyware.
Yeah,
It's really crucial to be aware of the signs that your device might be infected. And be super careful about the apps you install and the permissions you grant them.
the force actually mentioned a specific example called MSpy. What's the story there?
Well, MSpy is a popular commercial spyware app, and it's marketed for like parental control and employee monitoring. It just kind of illustrates how accessible this technology has become and why it's so important to be vigilant.
Okay, so we've covered the risks to, like, individuals. Right, but what about companies? How are they handling this, like, security nightmare of everyone bringing their own devices to work?
That's where mobile device management comes in, or MDM. It's basically a set of policies and software tools that companies use to try and secure and manage all the mobile devices that are accessing their networks and data.
So it's kind of like a company trying to herd cats,
Yeah.
with each cat being a different device with its own quirks and vulnerability.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
And what would someone who's, like, testing these systems for security, what would they look for?
Well, from an ethical hacking perspective, testing MDM systems involves trying to bypass the security measures
Oh, okay.
and seeing if you can access sensitive data. It's kind of like a high-stakes game of cat and mouse.
I bet it is. The sources mentioned a few popular MDM solutions: IBM Maya's 360, Cisco Meraki Endpoint Management, and Citrix Endpoint Management. What are some of the key features of these platforms?
They all offer a range of features, things like policy management, security management, inventory management, and app management. They help companies enforce things like password requirements, remotely lock or wipe devices, and control which apps can be installed.
Sounds pretty comprehensive. But how does this play into that whole bring your own device trend?
Yay.
It seems like that would make things even more complicated.
Well, BYOD has both benefits and risks. It can increase productivity, employee satisfaction, and it can lower costs for companies because employees can use the devices they're already familiar with.
Right.
And companies don't have to buy and manage separate work devices.
But isn't there a massive risk of data leakage or unauthorized access?
Absolutely.
How do you balance those competing needs?
Yeah, that's the big question. BYOD introduces a whole new level of risk for data leaks and exposure of confidential information. Just imagine an employee losing a personal phone that has access to company emails and sensitive documents.
Yeah, that's scary.
It really is a balancing act between convenience and security.
So we talked about mobile security from the user's perspective and the company's perspective. But what about the operating systems themselves?
Right.
Android and iOS have very different approaches to security, don't they?
They do. Android, being open source, it offers more flexibility and customization. Its code is available to anyone.
Okay.
Which can be both a blessing and a curse.
How so? I mean, it seems like open source would be a good thing, right?
Still, it does allow for more innovation, and it leads to a wider range of devices and apps. Okay. But it also means there are more potential vulnerabilities for attackers to exploit. Think of it like a bustling city. Lots of options, but also more potential for trouble.
Okay, so more freedom, but also more risk.
Exactly.
What about iOS then?
Well, iOS is a closed ecosystem, very tightly controlled by Apple. This gives them more control over security, and it makes it harder for attackers to find and exploit those weaknesses. But it also means less flexibility for users.
So it's like choosing between, I don't know, a bustling city with lots of options, but also potential dangers, and a gated community with stricter rules, but a higher level of security.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
How is that reflected in how the two systems are built?
Well, the sources talked about the Android stack. Imagine it like a layered cake. Each layer represents a different component of the system. At the bottom, you have the device hardware, then the hardware abstraction layer, then the kernel, the Android runtime, and finally the applications at the top.
So each layer interacts with the ones above and below it.
Yeah.
So does iOS have something similar?
It does. It has its own stack. It's structured differently, but follows that similar principle of layered components.
The sources pointed out that Android covers all 5 core areas of the mobile security model, while iOS lacks permission-based access control. Why is it such a big deal? Does it mean iOS is, less secure?
Well, it means that with iOS, apps don't have to explicitly request permission to access certain data or features. Now, Apple argues that their strict app vetting process and their overall security measures kind of mitigate this. But some security experts, they remain a little skeptical.
So there are always trade-offs.
Yeah.
Even with a closed ecosystem. It seems that this leads us to something that's always intrigued me. Rooting and jailbreaking.
Oh, yeah.
What's the appeal and what are the risks?
Okay, so rooting for Android and jailbreaking for iOS essentially bypass the restrictions imposed by the operating systems and the device manufacturer.
Okay.
They give you more control, allowing you to customize, install unapproved apps, and tweak system settings.
It sounds kind of tempting. Like breaking free from the limitations.
It does.
So there must be a downside.
Oh, there definitely is. Rooting or jailbreaking typically voids your warranty.
Oh.
And it can also introduce instability, performance issues, and security vulnerabilities. And in some cases, it can even permanently damage your device, making it completely unusable.
Yikes. That doesn't sound worth it. It seems like there's just a lot to consider when it comes to mobile security.
Yeah.
Where do we even go from here?
That's a great question.
What are some practical steps that users can take to protect themselves?
That's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll get into the actions you can take to improve your mobile security, and how to strike that balance between functionality, convenience, and safety.
All right. That sounds like a plan. We'll be back in just a moment to continue our deep dive. All right, so we've uncovered some pretty serious mobile security risks that are, basically lurking in our pockets.
Yeah, it's a bit unsettling when you think about it.
It is, and we've talked about all the different ways our devices and operating systems try to protect us. But, I mean, where does that leave us? What can we actually do to be safer?
Well, the good news is there are a lot of practical steps you can take
Okay,
to improve your mobile security. And it's not about becoming like a tech expert overnight, but it's more about building good habits
okay.
and making informed choices.
So let's talk strategy then. Where do we even start? What are the most important things to focus on?
It all starts with awareness, really. You need to understand the potential risks like phishing attacks, malicious apps, data leaks, those kinds of things. Be cautious about the information you share online, and be wary of suspicious emails, links, app requests, anything like that.
Think before you click. Sounds simple enough,
It is.
but I bet we're all guilty of clicking on things we shouldn't sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
What about all those security features that are, like, built into our phones? Are we even using those effectively?
Well, enabling those features is super important.
Okay,
Use strong, unique passwords, enable biometrics if your device has it, and take advantage of two-factor authentication wherever possible. And basically, treat your phone like you would your computer.
okay.
Don't leave it unlocked and unattended.
Okay, so strong passwords, biometrics, two-factor authentication. It's like building a fortress around our data.
Exactly.
But what about those public Wi-Fi networks? Are they always a no-go?
You know, it's best to avoid them for sensitive activities like online banking or shopping. But if you absolutely have to use public Wi-Fi, consider using a VPN.
A VPN, I've heard of those. What exactly do they do?
A VPN creates a secure, encrypted connection between your device and the internet. It's kind of like tunneling your traffic through a private, protected pathway,
Okay,
which makes it a lot harder for hackers to intercept your data.
so it's like putting on a disguise for your data while you're out in public.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
Are there any other, like, essential tools that we should be using?
Another essential habit is keeping your software updated.
Oh, yeah.
You know, those updates often include security patches that fix vulnerabilities that attackers could exploit.
Okay, so I know those update notifications can be annoying.
They can be.
I'm starting to see them in a new light now.
Good.
It's like those updates are like patching holes in our digital armor.
Exactly.
What about apps? How can we be smarter about the ones that we choose?
Be really selective about the apps you install, especially the free ones. Feel a bit uneasy? That's probably a good thing. It means you're starting to think critically about the choices you make and the impact they have on your digital life.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand the risks, the defenses, and the bigger picture, the better prepared you'll be. Especially in this world that's always changing.
And don't forget, security is not a finish line. It's an ongoing journey.
It is. And it's a journey we're all on together.
That's right. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.